Welcome back. July has been declared a Mental Illness Awareness Month. It's an endeavour to reduce the stigma often associated with mental illness and, of course, importantly, to save lives. Many myths about depression and the use of antidepressants still persist. Let's get the thoughts of Dr Wium Erasmus from the South African Society of Psychiatrists for more details on this. And Doctor, good evening to you. And what does a month like this do when you and I can have a conversation like this, but the stigmas still exist? People believe what they want to believe, even if it's wrong.
Sure, thanks for the opportunity. So, there's so many stigmas associated with mental illness and specifically depression. And often people struggle to understand the concept of mental illness, and that can also be like a physical illness where your brain can actually be sick biologically. And so it's not just in your head or that you are imagining that you have symptoms, but that people can really suffer from depression and other forms of mental illness. And so we try to bring awareness that if you are struggling with these symptoms, to really get help, and that it's not just you that's not strong enough or not trying hard enough with the symptoms that you're struggling with.
How do we begin to have a conversation, either as someone who suspects, doctor, that they may have, I'm going to use the example we're talking about, it's the most common, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I hope I haven't said that out of turn, that being depression. How does someone who's battling with depression, suspects they could be battling with depression, or a loved one who has someone in their life who has depression, where do you try and have this conversation with them, or how do you come out and talk to someone about your own depression?
I think it's important to realize that it's not something to be ashamed of. Depression can affect anyone, no matter their race, gender, socioeconomic status, cultural background, religion. And it is important to get help, and that there is help out there. So I think it's to start with, you can always contact your general practitioner or a local counsellor. And then very importantly, also there's South African Depression and Anxiety Group that can be contacted. So there is help out there for people. I think it's important that if someone you know is struggling with that, to approach them, to tell them that you see they're struggling and that you can actually get help, and you shouldn't be ashamed of these symptoms, but that you should seek help for yourself and those around you.
I remember having a discussion with SADAG, a South African Depression and Anxiety Group, earlier this year. I'm not going to discount, of course, women in our country. We'll come there in a moment. But men, we have a bit of a problem when it comes to talking about depression, even just being vulnerable as well. And we've seen an increase in suicide amongst men. So how do we get past the pride? How do we get past the ego and be vulnerable? That's often all it is. It's just a conversation. But I'm stereotyping, but many guys, many men just can't seem to do it.
Absolutely, and that's unfortunately very common. And that is a little bit, obviously that as a man, I think we feel that personally, maybe that you're a failure if you complain about depression, and that people will judge you and think that you're not strong enough. But once again, it can affect anyone, and people really struggle with depression, and that there is help out there. So I think that it's important that, for the people around us and for our families as men to stand up and realize that we have a responsibility to look at those around us, and that if you are struggling, to swallow your pride to a degree and look for the help so that you can support the people that depend on you.
And I suppose we need to go to the other side of this coin as well, Dr. Erasmus, and talk about the women in our society as well, the burdens that they carry running households, children, careers, everything else as well. They also, I think this is a new trend, they also don't get the sense, the interviews I've done before, they don't get a sense anymore that they can be the vulnerable one in a relationship. And that can be a problem when the woman in our society also starts shutting down.
Absolutely, and I think to a degree times have changed, that women too, which is a good thing, are able to have careers, but yes, have a large amount of responsibilities with their kids, with running a household. And so we often see just that people burn out, especially women, because they have so much on their plates and just juggling so much at the same time. So I think it's important that as women also to have a look at being balanced and making sure that even though there are a lot of responsibilities to look after yourself, to make sure that your mental health is looked after. And once again, if you in any way think that you have a problem, look for professional help and go speak to people who have better knowledge about this to identify if there really is a problem or not.
As we're talking about myths and misconceptions as well, help me before I start saying goodbye, Dr. Erasmus. How do we begin to identify someone who is depressed, not just having a tough day, not just overworked, not just tired, just having one of those down days, versus someone that has depression? Maybe someone's watching at home now going, well, I've got a teenager, he's a bit moody. Welcome to the world of raising teenagers. How do we know when someone has an issue with depression?
So depression usually lasts for at least about a 2-week period or longer, and it's usually associated with obviously a reduction, a low mood, a depressed mood, a loss of interest in activities that you've enjoyed before. But you'll often see that the person just becomes really isolated. They don't talk as much as they used to. They spend more time by themselves. They don't want to engage in the activities they've done before. You can also see changes in their sleeping pattern, their appetite, their energy. So it's often more that you can see things in their behavior. It's not always that they're going to say they're feeling depressed, but if you see someone is not enjoying things they used to and kind of isolating and not as involved in the things they used to do before, that could be early signs that something is wrong.
What's the first step that you go to? You mentioned earlier possibly speaking to a GP. Some people might not have direct access to a GP. Many people these days use public clinics. They might not have the trust of a medical practitioner directly. Maybe someone at a school, at a church. Where do we try and send someone to take the concern forward?
So definitely, so there are many entry points, and so within communities there are often, with churches, as you've mentioned, and many schools nowadays will have a counsellor. It's not always a psychologist, but someone that has some experience in mental health. And it's important just to find some form of entry point. You can always be referred to someone that has more experience, but there often is within the community, even non-profit organizations that work with mental health, like the South African Depression and Anxiety Group. They can always be contacted or sent an SMS, and one of their counselors will phone you back. So I think it's just important that within your community, even if it's not a doctor, speak to someone who can then either refer you to just kind of get the ball rolling, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Get the ball rolling. But the most important thing is to talk about it as well, and also to ask. Don't just assume someone is okay, because often that just leaves it too late when something terrible happens. Dr Wium Erasmus, thank you very much, sir, for your time this evening. Member of the South African Society of Psychiatrists. July declared a Mental Illness Awareness Month. It's maybe a good time just to take a look around. Those loved ones, is there a lot more sadness? Are they a lot more withdrawn? Just be careful. It might just be a bad day. But if it's not going away, there might be a bit of a problem.